Now let's take a look at the front pages of today's newspapers now. And like a lot of the papers today, The Guardian is leading on the government's early release scheme. It says rapists, child sex offenders and grooming gang perpetrators will now be excluded from those plans.
But The Times reports that some prisoners convicted of manslaughter will remain eligible for early release. Andy Burnham says that he can't go any further without risking the prison system reaching breaking point.
The Telegraph today focusing on the death of PC Andrew Harper. It reports that the two men convicted of manslaughter over his death will remain eligible for early release despite those new restrictions.
It's causing widespread anger this morning. The Daily Mail reports that an Afghan boxer who reached Greece in a small boat has been arrested in connection with the murder of a British missionary. Well, we're joined now by the former Conservative Education Secretary Gillian Keegan and Faiza Shaheen, the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK.
Good morning.
So after all the anger, the outrage, the fuss and bother of last week, the sheer disbelief, PC Andrew Harper's killers are going to be freed early, along with other killers, domestic abusers, violent offenders of all kind. No attempt, it would seem, has been made by this government to find the kind of temporary solutions that were actively discussed last week, things like the Nightingale prisons being built or disused army barracks being converted into temporary jails. None of that's going to happen. We're just going to let a lot of people out early.
Well, I think the problem with probably building things like Nightingale prisons, and we found this in the pandemic, is it's not the building, it's the staff. So you still need to have enough prison staff. However, there are only just around about 1,000 people in prison for manslaughter. So as there's 87,000 people in prison, I don't know why this group is included. So murder is excluded, that's about 6,500. So this is another 1,000 that are in for manslaughter. The original idea was, I think it was those that had over a 4-year sentence and anybody who was a rapist, paedophile, etc., excluded from this scheme. And I don't know why they've gone further than that, but particularly they should look at manslaughter. I don't understand it.
Going to be released.
Yeah,
terrifying for people who suffered.
Someone who's been terrorised.
It does make me question, though, because there was all this pressure that was rightly put on the new Prime Minister to say, like, why are these people allowed to have early release when they've done such serious crimes? And it does make me wonder that how much our prison service really is at the brink that he's taken this out of the equation, knowing that he would get, quite rightly, the political heat, especially on the PC Harper case, you know, that he didn't go as far as that. And I actually think that this is a case of absolute public policy failure over time. Like, this is the legacy of the cuts that were made under the Conservatives and then some efforts to put some more investment back in, but too late. So there's more prisons aren't online yet. It absolutely was shocking to me to see that people can just have a third of their sentence. It's absolutely wrong. And, you know, I support what we do in prison with people where they have remorse and, you know, they've reformed and you can understand that, but that's not what is happening here.
Oh, no, they're not being rewarded for good behaviour. No, they're being let out extremely early simply because the prisons are getting crowded.
Gillian, on that point then about, you know, there being successive failures to get to grips with this, because this isn't the first time, is it, that we've seen numbers reach capacity, something's had to be done about it, and yet long-term thinking didn't happen with the planning over how many prison places we've got. So this has been a failure that's built up.
So we did have 5 new prisons that were being built. One of them has just recently come on stream. That's the extra 3,000 places that everyone's talking about. I don't know what's happened to the other 4. They were all delayed a bit because of COVID and the construction delays during COVID. But I think they've also suffered from planning. Nobody really wants the prison nearby. So I think there's been a lot of opposition to some of these prisons. But I don't know whether they're still building them, to be honest. The government, that was the scheme that we put in place. One of them I know has been delivered. I don't know where the other 4 are up to. But that's the only answer. You have to build
well, it's not just prisons, though, isn't it? It's probation services were massively cut. So they've been also under a lot of pressure, which means that when people come out, they're more likely to go back in, right? The fact that these prisons
they're more likely to go back in because they commit another crime. I mean, you know.
Well, but if they get more support, I mean, that's what you see in the data, that quite clearly, if you have more support...
If they get a job, is actually
right, okay, but that's more investment. Again, and those sorts of things were cut under austerity. I mean, it's yet again a reminder that you make those cuts and the costs come a few years later.
We also know, because the record shows it, that prisoners who are let out early tend to reoffend.
If they don't get a job, it's all about getting a job. That's why I introduced apprenticeships into
So this raft of early releases, which is set to start, it's only delayed it by a month. Instead of starting in September, it's going to start in October. We know as a statistical certainty that some of these guys are going to reoffend.
About 30%.
Yeah, about 30%.
30% go back very quickly.
So can I ask you to muse on this for a moment or two? Are we looking at a complete failure, not just of looking at the past record, yes, you're right to point that out, but a complete failure of imagination to deal with this problem, to simply say that the only solution available is to let them out early? It strikes me as almost an admission of defeat. Oh, well, we can't think of anything else. Surely, a government with the resources and with the scale and with the experience of a British government could find a way, surely, not to let dangerous men out super early. It just seems to me to be, in principle, unthinkable.
Yeah, you're right. It is a failure. Like when you read this, it's disbelief. We're one of the richest countries in the world and we can't handle this problem.
Yeah.
And I think also it just asks a lot of questions about the way in which the system is working in general. Because where you should let people out maybe earlier is where there's less serious crimes, theft, etc., where, I'm not saying that those aren't crimes, but you can see that there might be, less of a problem with letting them out early. What is going on there? How are they being supported in prison? Because prison isn't just about, of course, being punished for the crime, but also about a time to reform and reflect on what you've done. And some people do show remorse, but a lot of people don't. And this is where the investment, if you look globally... Excuse
me to interrupt you there, the killers of PC Harper...
They don't have remorse.
They've
never apologised.
Of remorse. Their behaviour during their trial was outrageous.
It was.
In court. Their behaviour as they were taken to and from court, laughing and joking and threatening the cameras. Their behaviour apparently in prison has been appalling. And these guys are coming out early. Can you imagine how his widow, PC Harper's widow, Lissy, is feeling right now, this morning? She'll be awake and she'll be thinking and reflecting on this. That these guys who robbed her of her husband, who robbed her of her happy future before she even had a chance to go on honeymoon with the guy, are coming out in a few weeks' time.
Yeah,
can you imagine how she's feeling?
Unforgivable. I mean, literally, she will... I think she said that, actually, I will not forget and I will not be able to forgive this. No. It makes no sense. And because there's only a small number of people in this category, I don't understand why they're in.
I agree with
87,000 prison places, and, the vast majority are in for, as Pfizer said, more lower-level crimes. I don't know why these two in particular, or anyone who's committed manslaughter, is actually eligible. And originally, that was not the point of the Sentencing Act. It was supposed to be those that are under 4-year prison sentences and, hadn't done serious sexual offences. So I don't understand what has happened now. They should accelerate the building of those 4 prisons. There must be another one that's about to be available. The first one's not long been released. So that is the way to solve it. We do have longer prison sentence than most countries.
Do you think this is Andrew Burnham's first failure as a Prime Minister?
Because he sort of talked about the fact that he wanted to exclude further categories of offenders but couldn't do without risking the prison system reaching capacity.
But this is what
He's going to have to explain that better, isn't he?
There are going to be questions, aren't there? Because this is sort of, like you were saying, a big test, isn't it? And actually, if it's something that then is hugely unpopular and there's been a big backlash to this, how damaging that could be for him.
And the numbers don't add up. I mean, I always look at the data and they don't add up. So what he's saying and the numbers of prisoners in this category do not make sense.
How damaging do you think there's something about this inherited situation, because it's also how many people are in remand because the court systems are being so slow. So people that haven't even been charged yet.
That's been doubled. That's been doubled because of COVID. There's probably double the amount of people on remand because the courts were closed during COVID.
But then we can't get back into just always looking back.
No, I think you're right. I mean, absolutely. And I think
they're on their second
the whole point is
now.
of a Prime Minister that you've got to take control of the situations that you've got, and it's what you do with that, isn't it, that you get judged on.
No,
and 2 years.
We'll have to answer more questions about why exactly.
Yeah, they did identify this as on the way in. The very first thing, remember Shabana Mahmood said, this is a big problem. We have this sort of glut and we need to handle this in this way. So it's been 2 years now, over 2 years. So I think they cannot now go back, to pre-COVID times. There is definitely pressure on the system because of that, because, all the courts were closed. So that's why there's more people on remand for longer and the courts are struggling to catch up. But 2 years enough time for them to have done something.
It would be great to invite Mr. Burnham on this programme to explain himself in a little more detail, as you say, but we can't because he's on holiday. He's only been in the job a couple of weeks. He's off on his jollies. I mean, Keir Starmer came in for criticism when he attempted to take a holiday shortly after becoming Prime Minister, and in fact he had to cancel them because of the riots back in that particular summer. Do you think this is a good time for our Prime Minister to be?
I mean, I love going on holiday now without the press following me. They followed me twice on holiday. Really? Knocking on my neighbours' doors because I have a house in Spain because I lived there for years. And it's just a joy. In fact, all the neighbours talk about it, oh, there's no one with you this time. So I think it's ridiculous, actually, that the press do sort of, harm people. I think everyone should have a holiday. He's not exactly been in the job that long, but...
he's had a long lead-up. He was the Mayor of Manchester. He did have this very intense campaign in a by-election. I would say, people are human, they need a break. But this is such an important summer for him to get out. I mean, they have seen this bounce in the polls for Labour. So, obviously has to be careful about continuing that. And he's going to have a very, very busy autumn, right? Let's face it, he's going to go back to Parliament. Yeah. He's going to have a lot of pressure again.
The issue is, as Prime Minister, there are, I guess, only certain times when it is quieter, like now, like potentially, beginning of the new year. That's when other Prime Ministers have taken a break as well, that you can get those moments. But the optics of it, though, he may deserve a break, but only having been in the job 2 weeks when there's, this issue going on that people feel and other issues that haven't
actually.
It's bad optics. His advisors will have said, don't go. They used to say to me, don't go. And I'd say, it's my dad's 80th birthday. My dad's only going to be 80 once. I'm going. And I went for 3 days, right? Because it was my dad's 80th birthday.
So you think they would have advised him
I think they would have done, yeah, because... It's obvious. That's why David Cameron always went to a staycation as well, somewhere close by. So you didn't have the problem, if there was a problem, of coming back from wherever it is you were. So, they'll probably say he has a right to a holiday. Everybody does. But it does mean you're going to get this criticism.
They do say... A spokesperson has said the government continues to operate as normal, with the Prime Minister remaining in contact with officials, holding meetings and receiving regular updates on government business. So...
Which you do. I mean, you can do all the Zoom calls.
He's not really on holiday then.
He's perhaps not on holiday in the way that we might be thinking.
Nobody
is reading a book, in hand.
Even in business, every time I was in business, every holiday I went on, you would always have at least 2 or 3 calls, at least 2 or 3, Zoom calls. It's just a normal thing.
It's the way of the world with a lot of jobs these days, isn't it, actually, that you want to keep in touch. OK, well, we'll wait to see, what happens with the early release scheme, because there is, as we're saying, a lot of public anger about it. We're speaking to Gemma Chapwell later in the programme as well, and it was her great niece who was her great niece who was killed when she was 2, and the mother who was convicted of child cruelty is one of those people that could be released. And as you were saying, Alex Norris, he's
the Justice Secretary, and we'll be doing quite a set-piece interview with him about this at about 8:30. If you're around, you might like to watch that. If you were watching yesterday, you might have seen the interview that I did with Kate with Zia Yusuf, the Reform spokesman, about these plans that Reform have announced, and they had a big show about it yesterday, to, if they become the next government, to turn the small boats around using the Navy. He even went so far as to say that they would terminate, I think was the word he used, any terrorists that they might find on board the boats, and they might actually use real force, armed force, against them to turn them back. He said the Marines might well, on instructions from the government, go onto the French beaches to return the illegal migrants. And we did say in the interview, well, what about the French? Don't you think they might have something to say about that? And he was very blasé about it. Here's a snatch of what he said yesterday.
Any vessel, any illegal migrant attempting to cross the English Channel will not be met with a free taxi service and free hotels. They will be intercepted by Royal Marines, who will conduct a humanitarian mission, take them on board and return them back to France.
And we put it to him, well, that would mean going into territorial waters. Don't we think the French Navy might have something to say? Well, the French have said, exactly as we predicted yesterday, no.
Yes. Yeah.
No way. You're not doing it.
So they said it would violate French sovereignty, maritime law and international law. So,
which is everything that we said yesterday.
That's quite a few breaches, isn't it?
Well, ignorance can be bliss. I mean, not for long, but it can be bliss sometimes when you don't have to actually deal with the problem and you just have to sort of...
Well, it makes a great headline, doesn't it?
It does,
and it plays to the gallery. I mean, a lot of people would say, good, yeah, let's just do that.
Yeah.
But life isn't that simple.
And also think
it would have
about
been
the
done if it was.
spending. We don't even have the defence spending right now. So then now they're going to put extra jobs for them to do. I mean, it's just a ridiculous notion. It's just all a gimmick and a way to avoid scrutiny elsewhere.
So we can safely say that even if reform were to get into power, this is a policy that simply couldn't get off the ground.
Honestly, if it was as simple as getting the Navy to sort it, then the military, you call on hand lots of times when there's big crisis in government, and all these discussions will have taken place many times because it has been a problem for many years. So, let's just assume all the easy things that you think no one else has thought of have already been dismissed because they are not legal. And therefore you then have to look at other aspects of deterrence, and we still haven't got to that, which is ultimately the only way you're going to really get rid of the problem.
I think you're being generous in saying that assuming that those things would work. I mean, they've got Robert Jenrick and people that came for very senior positions in the Conservatives. They already know that. It's just about narrative. It's just about their communication to their crowd.
He would know it, but he would say probably he would support Kemi's position of leaving the ECHR because that is part of a lot of the lawfare that we had as the government, where we were always being taken to court when we tried to do anything, and it was being held up and jammed up in the courts. Also, got not a great use of court time, but that is something we do need to.
What do you make of this? It's also on the front page of the Telegraph today. This idea of the electoral pact between Reform and Restore. Nigel Farage in talks to strike an electoral pact with Restore Britain. He's said to be open-minded about discussing working with his former colleague Rupert Lowe, who was ejected from the party last year, and they sort of famously had a fallout, didn't they, about situations. What do you think is going to be the future of this then?
Well, he's fallen out with lots of people. This could be a first when he's actually made up with somebody. I don't know that. I mean, he's literally had every party. He's fallen out with everybody. I mean, it's so consistent. This could be a first. I mean, maybe they'll televise it. It would be good to see if he could actually rebuild a relationship after he's fallen out. He's very good at falling out with people.
Well, I mean, I think
that's a core skill.
The problem here is that they need to, because you're seeing the Restore vote eat into Reform's vote, and you saw it in Makerfield. It splits their voting base. And if they're going to be serious contenders in a general election, they are going to need to come together again, because they're not going to get anywhere on their own, either of them, actually.
That doesn't take into account the egos, though, of those two men, which I think literally
and also
could block out the sun.
it feels like they really dislike each other. I mean, Lowe especially has been quite scathing of him.
He's been very personal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we think potentially, even if they did join together in talks, that actually that might not mean that a successful pact will come of it longer term.
I mean, long term, you have to agree on the policies. They don't actually also agree on policies, because this is where a lot of the divide came into. Rupert Lowe's even more to the right.
Yeah. He believes that people like me should be re-migrated, whatever that means. I don't know where to, but, and that really extreme policies.
Yeah, it's Tommy Robinson's sort of ilk policies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What is your background then?
My dad was from the Fiji Islands and my mum from Pakistan.
Right, and you think, having read the remarks he's made, that you would fall into the category?
Well, the chair of the party was on LBC, and someone with Nigerian origin, but born here, they asked directly, would you send him back? And he wouldn't say no. So
it's outrageous.
Send him back to...
On what many would see as complete racism, we have this very disturbing report from the Society of Radiographers and the NHS, saying that their staff have noticed, without question, a sharp rise in racism from patients over the last 18 months, including patients calling, I've got the quotes here, calling staff dirty foreigners, talking about people coming over here, taking our jobs, that old one. NHS staff have been called monkeys, and patients have refused to be treated by non-white staff. What's going on?
Well, I mean, these are connected, right? So you have the likes of Restore and Reform going out and talking in very racist terms. If not explicitly, then it's there in the way in which they talk about immigration, for instance. And unfortunately, and I hear this from lots of people, that the visceral words towards people has got much worse. People that have been here a long time are it's like the 80s again, the sorts of language that they're hearing. And I just want to thank the NHS staff, because they don't get thanked enough, I think. There's I was in hospital a couple of weeks ago with an emergency surgery, and yeah, a lot of the staff were from different countries. And a Filipino nurse was telling me how we went over there during COVID and recruited them.
Yes.
And we don't hear this.
We were
right?
competing with the Japanese who were trying to actually get the same Filipino nurses.
We rely
to
so
get them to
much.
come
We do.
here.
The NHS would
Diverse
completely collapse.
Yeah.
workforce in the NHS, don't we? And to see actually there be a noticeable rise in racism is just seems to be staggering. And they do a tough enough job anyway, don't they, without having to face this? What do you think the answer is?
I was really surprised when I was an MP. Obviously, you get a load of abuse yourself. But I remember the CEO of our hospital in Chichester showing me all of the stuff they got and their staff got. And it was absolutely shocking, because these are the times where, everybody was so grateful to the NHS. I mean, we always are. And I couldn't believe it. And then you'd see it with head teachers. So something about the discourse about people and how they treat public servants now has definitely deteriorated. And now I think Faiza's right. If it's deteriorated into racism, that's because they'll feel that there's permission to do this from some of the poor leadership.
This poll by the SOR, the Society of Radiographers, and I take my hat off to these people. It reveals that the staff sometimes just accept the racist remarks and they just get on with their job.
Shows how professional they
Get on with
are.
treating someone who's verbally abusing them or even threatening them. I mean, I personally think that someone who's behaving like that, who's got the energy to behave like that, has got no place in a hospital. I think they should be...
Should they be denied care?
Should be denied care.
I mean, I think for a lot of those people that are in our NHS, they have this, they have the ethics to think we need to look after people no matter what. And that's one of the things that's so beautiful about the NHS. Yes. But they are here caring for us, and it's absolutely should not be accepted. So there needs to be ways in which to deal with those people. They are sick. They might be frustrated about waiting times. It's not the fault of the staff. To have someone quite senior to go and have a word with them, that they cannot treat people this way.
Yeah, no, it'll make their lives intolerable as well. I mean, putting up with that kind of pressure, you're trying to do the right thing. It's already a stressful job, and then you get a load of abuse. It's completely unacceptable. They should never have to put up with it.
And it's a reflection, unfortunately, of society generally. We know that.
Well, most people wouldn't do it.
Most people wouldn't do it, but
racism
racism has increased. And, every few days now, a mosque is being attacked, for instance. We know that Islamophobia has picked up, anti-Semitism has picked up.
Yeah.
We know that, that there is more abuse of this type. We have to reflect, really, about why this is happening.
Well, you already have, and you think that's because of it's above the line political discourse.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. That's setting the agenda for people to behave like this.
Well, and also what's happening in the Middle East and October the 7th and the fallout since then has actually really created quite a toxic environment.
And created more division at the same time. Well, the figures we've got is that 30% of nurses and 36% of doctors are from overseas. Obviously, we don't have the exact ethnic, breakdown of that figure, but that's the sort of numbers that we're talking about. But anyway, get in touch and have your say this morning. What is the answer? Should racist people be denied care? Should they be then turned away from hospital if they are emergency care?
I suppose it depends on their condition and what they're there for. But if they're there for an ingrown toenail, or they're there to have a couple of stitches put in a cut, I think they should be shown the door. I mean, if their life's in danger, you can't do that. But if they're basically getting what amounts to palliative care for something, and they're behaving like that, I don't think they should be allowed house room in the hospital. But
I think everyone's got to call it out where they see it, haven't they? In whatever environment. But I think particularly when it's face to face with someone who's trying to do a life-saving job and help someone out.
Well, I think you'd say leave casualty, go private.
I think the thing is about that, though, is that we also want to maintain our standards as a society. We don't want to slip to their level, right? So I actually think what you say about people calling it out, if you hear this anywhere, people are shamed. If other people say to them, especially if they're, white, etc., saying that's unacceptable, then they are shamed by others. And that actually does work. And showing solidarity with staff saying that's absolutely unacceptable, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I would say this is on all of us to take on wherever we hear it.
Okay.
And on the subject of the NHS, actually, we've got this figure this morning about the dementia care. 1 in 4 NHS beds could be occupied by someone with dementia by 2040. There's such pressure, isn't there, on hospital beds at the moment. We've still got the issue with the waiting lists of corridor care. This is obviously something that Prime Minister Andy Burnham has pledged to tackle, but we have seen this before, and previous administrations, previous governments have also said they're going to tackle it. It hasn't happened so far. Do you think he will be able to?
Well, I'm glad to hear him come in and say he's going to look at this seriously. Social care, this is really to do with the social care crisis. My father-in-law, his mother, who's very elderly, she was in the hospital for months while they looked for somewhere to put her in care home, find something. The first 3 months, I think, is free. After that, it's £8,000-9,000 a month. Right, so they're going to have to sell her house. And this is the reality many people are facing. So, I really hope Andy Burnham's saying he's taking this seriously. He wants to use his political capital on this. This is an urgent thing that needs to get sorted. If they do manage to sort this, it will have all those positive repercussions for the NHS.
Did you hear his full speech last week when he spoke, he extemporised and spoke with that? I was actually quite persuaded by it. I thought that was one of the best speeches that he's made. And I have to say, as a cynical old hack, I thought he was genuinely grasping the nettle about social care.
Yeah, he's got the personal experience. I mean, I was a social...
Because of his father.
Because of his father. Yeah. And lots of us will have now. I've had many relatives now who've been through this. And I'd be surprised if it's only 1 in 25, because today about 80% of the patients in hospital overnight are over 80. Yeah. And therefore you've got more likelihood of getting dementia over 80, or if not, you're normally on your way to a care journey. You've had a fall, you need a bit more support at home. It's literally, and that is what's blocking up a lot of the beds, because the social care is not there.
So actually by tackling that, it could make a real difference.
Absolutely.
So we spent a year trying to reform it, and then the whole thing was stopped because of churn, again, ministerial churn. So I did that for a year. It has to be done, because it's so unfair today. Right. It's so unfair. And most people don't realise until they're in the worst. They've just had the diagnosis and they're there with the bills and all of that financial, as well as the impact on you.
Now, do you want to know what Noel Edmonds is doing these days?
Oh,
okay. Noel Edmonds,
you're linking the two stories, no?
He's lobsters.
Oh, right,
He's posted this online.
We were at a place where there were some lobsters in a tank, and we're a little bit uncomfortable about lobsters in tanks. So we bought the lobsters, and now Liz is going to release them. Oh,
there they are.
Here we are.
Here we go.
And she's going to get very wet if she's not careful.
2, 3.
You see, the problem here is, how do we know that the lobsters are better off in freezing cold seawater?
I hope the lobsters were all right.
He actually looks pretty good, doesn't he? He looks exactly the same as
he's
never
not
changes.
aged. I thought that too. I was like, wait, I watched him as a kid. He looks the same.
Yeah. Can I just say, we do have a little clip here from an expert who's had their say about the lobsters. Let's take a look.
Not going to have any impact whatsoever on the state of lobsters in the environment. It is completely a attention-seeking stunt. Just taking 2 lobsters out of a tank and releasing them into the harbour is going to have zero impact at all. I would guess those lobsters are just going to walk into the next available lobster pot, be caught by the fishermen and sold back to the fish shop, where they can live again in the tank and be caught and consumed.
Okay. So I mean, actually, at least he bought them, unlike that woman who was convicted of, I think, of theft, when she plucked what she thought were lobsters out of
crayfish,
her thing. They were crayfish, and they're fresh water, and she threw them in the sea, which meant they would have died in about 2 minutes.
So you have to be careful in that kind
the
of
internet,
stunt.
social media's got a lot to answer for, and I would imagine this is. We can add this to the list.
I assume the motivation is
that video.
Is he a vegetarian? Is he saying that there's not, that we're taking too many lobsters out of the sea, we're undermining the population? I don't know about lobsters particularly, but I think that's the case for lots of other types.
All right. The Justice Secretary, Alex Norris, joins us now. Good morning to you, Mr. Norris. What many cannot fathom is why you couldn't have come up with a more imaginative solution to prison overcrowding than simply opening the doors and letting violent criminals out early. It seems to many people to be a complete abrogation of the government's responsibility to keep people safe.
Well, Richard, I can't accept that that's what's happening. Let's remember the origins of this. We inherited, when we came to government 2 years ago, prisons crisis where we were running out of prisons in days, prison places, and that would mean that people would be arrested and bailed straight home. At the moment, without the changes we've introduced, both in terms of the prison places we've built, as well as the changes that are coming into effect this autumn in the Sentencing Act, we would run out of prison places this October or November. So we've made important changes, some of which involves people leaving prison earlier than they would have done. However, I would would like to be clear with viewers, that's never included murderers, that's never included terrorists. 18,000 prisoners are not eligible for this. Nevertheless, me as a new Justice Secretary and Andy as a new Prime Minister have taken a pause to look at this again to see what other types of offences we could remove from this, because we know how important it is to the public. I'm pleased to be able to say today that we're able to remove rapists from the scope of this. We're able to remove child sex abusers from the scope of this as well. We would like to have gone further. The Prime Minister said that, I've said that, but we couldn't go any further because otherwise we would be out of places in prisons, and then there'd be nobody getting arrested and nobody getting detained. And that, of course, can't be right.
That depends on the solution, doesn't it? Your solution is to let them out. There are, again, millions of people in this country who cannot understand why there's been such a failure of imagination to come up with some other plan to deal with this. That a failure of leadership, really. That the Prime Minister couldn't look at his cabinet, perhaps even call a special Cobra meeting about this, and say, I'm not interested in anybody discussing a solution involving releasing prisoners early. I only want solutions that keep them in, such as temporary prisons, such as converting army barracks, building Nightingales prisons, allowing women prisoners, who are not dangerous, most of them, out early and freeing up those spaces. There was a whole raft of possibilities that were widely discussed publicly last week, and you seem to have ignored every single one of them. You've just gone for the easy option, let them out.
Again, Richard, that's not right. First of all,
it is right. That's exactly what's happened.
People, if they are removed earlier than their sentence would have said previously, they will be under very, very significant controls, the widest range of probation powers that there's ever been, is the first point. Secondly, with regards to creative solutions, the previous government over their 14 years built a net of 500 extra places in prisons in their time. We are building 14,000 between now and 2031 and have already brought 3,200 on stream. So we are doing those things at pace. The Prime Minister has asked me to, and I am working now on some of those innovative things as well, such as how we could use the estate more flexibly, whether that comes to women's prisons, perhaps exactly as the way that you say, looking at people on indeterminate sentences.
But you're not doing it. You're not doing it. This announcement completely ignores those possibilities. You haven't raised the possibility of temporary prisons or freeing up cells which are currently occupied by women. You've simply said that you're going to let violent criminals, some of them are serial domestic abusers. Can you imagine how their wives and their partners feel knowing that these men are coming out early? I mean, I repeat, it is an abrogation of responsibility. You just seem to be shrugging the problem off.
Well, I mean, I can't accept that, and I'm certainly not shrugging this issue off. The reality is we need to do both of these things, not one or the other, because you talk about some very important changes, particularly to, the prison estate. We would not be able to do them in time for an October-November saturation date. So then, you talk particularly of the important matters around domestic abuse. What would be the consequences? Because this would be the future, Richard. If abusers were being arrested and then bailed straight home, even though they've breached whether it's restraining orders, domestic abuse protection orders, that cannot be the right thing to do. So we need to do both of those things. There is an important point that you raised there too around victims. We will be engaging directly with all victims and survivors to say to them, look, these are the powers we've got at our disposal. What does it take to make sure you're living your life fully and in confidence and in comfort?
I'll tell you what they'll tell. Well, I can give you the answer. They'll say keep them in jail.
Well, and I accept that. And
what do you expect them to say?
No, and I accept that, but in the circumstances where we've been able to do that for significant numbers of criminals, but we can't do that for all. That leads to, as I say, the saturation of the prison estate. So as an instead, what we're doing is to work with victims to make sure that individuals are living under significant controls, a presumption on tagging, drugs and alcohol orders, being banned from public events, and we're having that conversation directly with victims to make sure that we shape the controls on perpetrators. So again, I wouldn't want viewers to think that they're just wandering around under bog standard licence conditions, because it's not true. And of course, were they to breach them, they're liable for recall to prison.
Do you think that PC Harper's killers should be eligible for release?
I take absolutely no comfort in it whatsoever. You know that the driver is not eligible, but that the 2 other perpetrators are. And, I know the anger and the sadness that has caused the family. We're angry and sad too. There are good reasons why this has had to happen. Nevertheless, as they've said to me directly, they shouldn't really be having to bear the burden of a system that's failed them.
Well,
and I totally accept
I tell you what,
that,
they say that they feel utterly betrayed by this. So when you say that you're having the victims in your thoughts when you're making these decisions, actually the victims are saying to you, you have betrayed them.
And I've heard that message directly, and that of course is something that causes great sadness. We don't want to be in this circumstance. However, we are responsible for running the justice system and ensuring that there are prison places, both in October and November, but also for the future, which is why we've had to make these difficult changes. But I hear and I understand those criticisms.
Yes, Minister, this is what failure looks like, isn't it? You've got police killers. I emphasise that police killers and a killing that took place in circumstances that one can barely describe. It was so horrific. Being let out after 6 years. I repeat, this is what failure looks like, isn't it?
Well, this is not a situation we would want to be in.
Of course it's not.
And this is
no one's suggesting that you want to be in this situation. That's a waste of breath.
But
what we're trying to get at is the failure of this government to come up with imaginative alternatives to letting people like the 2 men in that car who dragged that poor 27-year-old policeman behind them for a mile at 2 a.m, leading to his appalling death, being allowed out after 6 years. It's just clearly wrong, isn't it?
Of course, and I've expressed, my sorrow to the families because, they quite clearly don't think that justice has been done, and I totally understand that. It is the result of long-term failure to have a proper prison estate that can meet the needs for this country. That happens long before our time in government. Nevertheless, we are making significant strides to change that for the future. But that does not change, Richard, the fundamental challenge, which is we would run out, if we do not make the changes in the Sentencing Act, we run out of prison places in October and November.
We
now,
understand
I'm pleased
that you've
we've
got
been able
take
to make
action,
some changes.
But why is it that police killers cannot be excluded from this early release scheme?
The point for the entire sort of cohort in scope for possible the progression model, the removal earlier than originally anticipated from prison, is that it's done by offence type. So we've removed from that, as I say, rape offences, terror types, due to their sentences, but we've gone further and removed rapists, child sex offenders. We have not been able to go as far as removing people who have been convicted of manslaughter.
There is so much anger over this.
I accept that.
There's a lot of at stake here, isn't there? Why could you not exclude police killers as well?
Because we have to go on the basis of the conviction. The conviction in this case was on manslaughter. We've not been able to. We simply cannot restrict and remove entirely manslaughter. People who've been convicted of manslaughter.
Couldn't you have made a special? Couldn't you have made? I mean, will just be a straw in the wind. But couldn't you have made a special exception regarding these 2 particular characters?
No, you couldn't do that. Fundamentally, it comes down to the offence for which someone's been convicted and their sentence type. You can't go one by one and decide through which ones should and shouldn't come out.
Why? Just let me pass this on from a huge number of our viewers, not just today, but going back to when this story broke last week and the week before. Why not put 4 prisoners into a cell for a while? A cell built for 2. Why not just pack them in until you've sorted out some extra spaces in the new prisons being built? Why should they be let out early when they've done what they've done? In many cases, in this particular case, killed a copper.
Well, it is really important that we use our prison estate to its fullest. I would assure viewers that we absolutely do already. Multi to a cell, there is not. If there was more space, of course, we would always use it. And the Prime Minister's talked about what else we might do in the estate as we go forwards. But there is not more room that can be done at this moment in time in our prisons. They are very much the fullest that they could be populated.
Why do the prisoners' rights for comfort override the victims' rights out here in the real world?
It's not about prisoners' rights for comfort. It's about the fullest that you can use the estate, and we are using that estate to its fullest. There is only a finite amount of room. There's only a finite number of cells. We are using that to its fullest. That's why we're building so many more places, 14,000 coming online that we've committed to. That's the furthest we could go with what we've got today. And we
Can
want
I
to go
ask
much
what
further
your
in the future.
message to the victims are, what your message to PC Harper's family is. We also had the great aunt of a 2-year-old child who was killed. There's the potential that her mother, who was convicted of child cruelty and allowing her death, she will be eligible as well. What's your message to them? Because they feel let down. You as the Justice Secretary, and for them, justice is not being done.
Well, a message for victims is a clear one. We hear and we understand their anger and their upset. I know, as well as not wanting us to make these changes, which I accept, they also now want certainty. They want a direct contact that is related to what's going to happen with their perpetrator, what controls are going to be put in place. They want to be involved in that. And my message for them is that process is going to start now. They're going to get that quality contact and that engagement.
I'm sorry to interrupt, and especially right when we're wrapping up, but I think actually if you speak to the victims, and many of them that we have spoken to, actually they want you to look at this again and they want you to take action to ensure that they get the justice they deserve. Thank you for your time.
Just one more before we go. One more very quick question to you. Is this not a failure of leadership? Would this not an opportunity for our new Prime Minister to look down the cabinet table and say, I'm not interested in the option of releasing prisoners early. I want you to bring me alternative solutions. I'll see you here next week and I want answers. A kind of a Churchillian, if you like, approach.
That's fine, Richard, but the reality is, firstly, the Prime Minister has paused this and looked again and made very significant changes, which I think it's very important to reiterate. But there aren't, Richard, solutions like that solve a crisis that comes in October and November. So, we are using all of those creative things that he's asked us to do, and that's what we're doing for our long-term future. But that does not change the immediate-term problem.
All right, Justice Secretary Alex Norris, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks very much. Well, we're just joined now briefly by the former Conservative Education Secretary Gillian Keegan and Faiza Sheehan, the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. We haven't got long to have a reaction to what was said there, but, I think victims listening to that are going to be upset, aren't they, about what was said?
And rightly, because the numbers don't support his argument. There's an extra 10,000 on remand than usual, so 16,000 on remand because of the bulk up, the problem in the courts, all due to COVID and the backlog of that. And there's only less than 900 people in total in prison for manslaughter, and not all of them will be eligible for the third. So a portion of that is what we're talking about here. Manslaughter is very serious. Somebody's lost their life. Victims will feel very strongly. So actually, to add manslaughter would be something that he ought to look at, in my view, and actually get some more action on remand.
That wasn't particularly difficult when you look at for the family of PC Harper, that his killers then will be eligible, and he's saying, well, there's nothing I can do about it, because then you'd have to include everybody who's been convicted of manslaughter.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that really struck me about that interview, and just thinking about the Labour government, they've been there for more than 2 years. He's absolutely right. They came in, they inherited a bad situation. But it does feel like they've wasted 2 years. Now, they've got Andy Burnham, but who's new? But a lot of the others have been there. Shabana Mahmood was very involved. Now, what is the accountability here? Surely they could have seen this happening 2 years. What did they put in place? And it just seems to me that the first 2 years of this Labour government has been a waste in lots of ways. And they've chosen to do things with the justice system, for instance, like charging people, taking action on Palestine action and the rest of it with terrorism. I mean, it just seems like a big mistake and a complete misuse of resources.
What I found frustrating in that interview, and interviews we did with government ministers last week as well, even then they were holding out the possibility that this might be indefinitely suspended, is a kind of, it's almost like a computer says no response, isn't it? Every possible alternative you suggest to be looked at, the answer is, in effect,
a difficult
computer
situation.
says no.
And ask them where the 5 new prisons are. They've been going since 2021. They must be coming soon.